Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie, and I believe that the right book at the right time can change lives, and that all readers should read children's literature, especially adults. So that's what we do here on the KidLit Love podcast. We celebrate all things children's literature: picture books, early readers, middle grade, and young adult novels for readers of all ages. In each episode, we'll talk with children's literature authors and discuss their books, their hopes, their dreams for readers, their writing process, and much, much more. Whether you're an adult reading to their inner child or connecting the young readers in your life with fantastic books, you've come to the right place. So grab a notebook to build your TBR, and let's get to today's episode of KidLit Love. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the KidLit Love podcast. I'm Stephanie Affinito, your KidLit loving host, inviting you back to another bookish conversation with a children's literature author. Today, I'm talking with Emma Otheguy. Emma's the author of several books for young readers, including Martina Has Too Many Tias, Marty's Song for Freedom, and Silver Meadows Summer, one of my personal favorites. She's here today to talk about her newest release, Cousins in the Time of Magic. In this book, three cousins get transported back to 1862 to play an important role in the Battle of Puebla, the reason we celebrate Cinco de Mayo today. This enchanting middle grade fantasy adventure will teach you a thing or two and will give you a new family to root for, too. I can't wait to share it with you, so we're going to get right to the episode. Emma, welcome to KidLit Love. I'm so glad you're here today.
Thanks so much. I'm so happy to be here.
So I already gave a little drop in the introduction that Silver Meadows Summers is what I call a 5-heart book for me. It's one that I just want to wrap up and hug and keep it close for a variety of reasons. So I'm particularly excited to get to say hello to you today.
I love hearing that.
And while, we're talking about Cousins in the Time of Magic, I'm hoping that you'll start with a little bit about you and just
Mhm.
give us some details about you, your other books, and your journey through children's literature.
Yeah, so my first book came out in 2017. So I have been writing and publishing children's books for 8 years now. I have written a mix of both historical and contemporary fiction and nonfiction for children. And my background really comes from I went to graduate school and got a doctorate in history. I thought I was going to be a history professor. But what I found when I was in graduate school was that I really missed working with kids, which I had done before graduate school. And I felt that I wanted there to be a public component to my work, meaning that I was learning all of these exciting things about the history of my people. I'm a bilingual Latina from New York City. And I never got to really share what I was learning with anybody outside of the academic world. I love children's literature because it gives me this opportunity not only to connect with young people, with kids, and hopefully cultivate the next generation of readers and scholars and creative people, but also because it gives me the opportunity to connect with teacher educators, with uh, young people who are studying education and who are going to be the teachers in the future, to teachers who are currently in schools. I just get this big cross section of people who are all connected by our common love of literature and of being readers and of being book people. So that's how I came to children's literature. And of course, I just love kids' books. I'm somebody who I have been passionate about children's books since I was a child. I used to volunteer at Story Hour when I was in high school at my public library. I loved reading picture books and novels to kids really for as long as I can remember. So it feels like home to be here.
Oh, that's it right there. Books can feel like home.
Yeah.
Book people
Yeah.
are the best people. So
Yes.
I can so relate to everything you are saying. I
Yes.
would like to know though, how did you make the leap from just history doctorate to writing for kids?
Well, I had a very supportive advisor who managed to, not have a heart attack when he found out what I was really up to in addition to writing my dissertation. But it actually flowed more naturally than you think. My first book for children was a nonfiction biography of Jose Marti, who is a Cuban poet and independence leader. I studied colonial Latin America. I studied the colonial period, both in Latin America, and was also looking at a lot of documents in Spain. So there was a really direct connection between the history of colonization in the Americas, thinking about change makers, and the picture book biography that became my first book, Marti's Song for Freedom. And once I had that book, I have a superstar agent, Adriana Dominguez. She's wonderful. And she really encouraged me to think about what else I wanted to say. And I really wanted to write fiction. And so, I wrote a contemporary novel, but right from the beginning, actually, my agent, Adriana, was asking me, well, you have this history background, you want to write fantasy. What about time travel? And it took several years. I mean, it took until now to get there. But really, from the beginning, even when I was still working on my dissertation, when I really didn't know that I was going to become a full time children's author, the idea to do a time travel series was there, it was present.
I love that. So I love a couple of things. Number one, you're right. Like what you're learning and what you're doing in your history world with your dissertation, right? You're still sharing results. You're still
Right,
disseminating, if we get all the academic terms right, but just to a different audience, right?
right,
Who desperately deserves and needs to know
right.
all of that information. But I'm also smiling from your advisor's point of view. It's like there are lots of windy paths that I have
Yes,
learned from this podcast of the author who comes to
yeah,
children's literature. And, the one of the dissertation to then the middle grade
yeah,
novel feels like it's twisty and turny, but it does make perfect sense of you just taking
yes,
all of this knowledge and bringing it to a younger generation in
yes,
a way that they can understand and they can wrap their hands around and they can truly enjoy,
right.
which is something that I wish there was more of when I was a kid
Mhm.
around those time periods. So I feel like it does make perfect sense, and all the dominoes just seem to fall into place
Yes.
hearing how you got here.
Yes, yes. I heard Lori House Anderson speak recently, and she said we should be telling kids that historical books are, and I'm going to forget the exact language she used, but she says we should be saying something like, "This is an action adventure novel," which it is, even if it is historical.
Yeah. It, especially the one we're going to talk about today.
Yes, yes.
So, Cousins in the Time of Magic. I have so many things that I loved about this book that I can't wait to talk with you about. But the one thing that I instantly connected to was this idea of a group of cousins.
Mm,
I came from a family. My mother had five brothers and sisters. I've lost count of how many cousins and second cousins there are. And so I just loved that bond was in this book because you don't see that all the time. You
yeah,
see groups of friends in middle grade and perhaps some sibling relationships, but
yeah, yeah,
cousins are a really special, unique bond. So I'd love to use that as the launching point for you to
yeah.
tell us a little bit about the book. No spoilers, of course, but a little bit about the book and the inspiration behind the story and behind the history inside of it as well.
Mhm. Yeah. So the book starts with these three cousins, and their Tia Sia, Tia means aunt, so their aunt Sia is a curator at a historical museum. That doesn't really appear in the book, but knowing that their aunt has this historical background and interest becomes very important. They stumble upon a portal into a secret cove where they can get into a magic boat and travel back in time over the Sea of Time. They travel back in time this way. And in the first book, they are transported back to the year 1862, which I think is a year that every kid in the United States should know about. It's a critical year in our history. It's during the United States Civil War. Most kids will learn that at some point, probably in middle school. And to a lesser extent, we do a little bit of Civil War education in elementary school. But what they don't learn is that this is also the time of the historical event that we now remember as Cinco de Mayo. So historians call Cinco de Mayo the Battle of Puebla. Cinco de Mayo is a holiday that commemorates this battle that took place in Puebla, Mexico in the year 1862. And so when the cousins go back in time to the year 1862, they get to see the connections between these two events that are world changing events happening in the US and in Mexico. And they get to see them together rather than what usually happens in schools, which is that we teach kids about the United States Civil War as if it's happening in isolation. We almost make it seem like the states are like a little island, and there's no Canada, there's no Mexico, there's no Europe. This is all happening in its own little bubble. And then if they learn about Cinco de Mayo, maybe they learn about it as a cultural holiday. They use it as an opportunity to learn about Mexican culture, which is obviously wonderful, but they're not necessarily learning why it matters to us as Americans and why it's something that Cinco de Mayo is a holiday that's been celebrated in the United States basically continuously since 1862. Why is that? That matters. And so what I tell kids is if you read Cousins in the Time of Magic, you're going to have a great fantasy adventure. I mean, in this book, you are going to get to fly in a hydrogen balloon. You're going to get to escape from, the Confederate soldiers and French soldiers. There are lots of soldiers chasing these kids. They have all sorts of hijinks running away. They get to ride on horseback and escape through the woods. There's so much action and adventure. There's a magic boat and time travel. But you're also going to learn about a history that I consider.
Mhm. Yeah. And as I read it as an adult, right, I was reading it. Of course, I first was sucked in by the time travel story. You're right. There's so much fun action. The balloons had my attention. The Morse code explanation there's
Yes.
so much that had my attention. But I was reading it feeling a little ashamed almost of I don't know this. I'm in my
Yeah.
40s. I certainly did not learn about
Yeah.
this in school when I was in school. Maybe it is
Me
different
neither.
now, I hope. So there was this element of, oh my gosh,
Mhm.
things just kind of opened up for me. I realized what I didn't know, but you did it in such a way where well, this adult reader appreciated it too. But for those younger readers, it was so naturally woven into that action and into
Mm.
that story that when I read about it and when they will read about it, it all just made sense. Like you said, it all fit together. The puzzle pieces fit together.
Mm.
It's not usually taught like that. And they're these isolated things that we have to remember, but you actually got us to live it. Like truly,
Yeah.
truly live it with these cousins, which, I think, and I know you agree, you're an author, you write these stories. That makes all the difference to what you feel when you read
Yeah.
it, and therefore how you embody it when you close the book, right? And what comes next. So, oh, I learned and I had an adventure.
Yeah, and that's really the goal because you're right that we're not taught this history. Most kids get no Latin American history in school. The problem with that is that Latin America is our closest neighbor. So to say nothing of the fact that a quarter of the people in this country are Latinos. And so, not only is Latin America our closest neighbor, but people from, who have Latin American descent are also a big number of ourselves and our neighbors.
Yeah.
So we don't learn this history in school. And then I believe that that has ripples on how we see the world, how we see our neighbors, how we see our communities, how we see, of course, global events and politics moving forward in our lives. And the reason that this all fits together in the book is because it all happened together in history. And so I'm using magic as a tool to kind of nudge these events closer together geographically, essentially, because the cousins managed to get from Virginia during the Peninsular Campaign of the Civil War to Mexico at the time of the Battle of Puebla and Cinco de Mayo in one day because they're using magic. But the events were happening at the same time and they were related. So the cousins learn about one of the fears that the Union had at the time of the Civil War is that Napoleon III, he's this French emperor who's making plans to invade Mexico in the 1860s, was on the Confederate side. He was having ironclad, these warships built for the Confederacy in French shipyards. So the Union was really afraid that when Napoleon III, this French emperor, goes to invade Mexico, that he's going to be successful and Mexico is going to be recolonized. And then suddenly the Confederates have an ally on their southern border. Then also the question becomes, what does this mean about who gets to govern? If we continue to have colonies in the Americas, if America is a place of colonies rather than a place of independent nations, um, a place of republics, these questions become really salient and pressing. And so what was happening in Mexico, I didn't make up the stakes that that had for the Union and the ways in which this felt really pressing for people who were living in the 1860s. And that's the reason why when the Mexicans defeat the French in the Battle of Puebla in on Cinco de Mayo, the 5th of May, 1862, they send the French packing, they hold them off for another year, basically, because of that success. People in the Union really celebrated. They saw it as a success, both directly for the Union Army in the Civil War, and they saw it as a success for the idea of living in a world of independent democracies rather than having one monarch or emperor with colonies be the way in which people are governed in the world. So it's a really important history for our democracy and for us as Americans and for how we define ourselves. And it all fits together really well. And we just don't get taught it. And so part of the intervention I wanted to make was giving kids a chance to learn this history almost organically. Just the way I read. I'm from the Dear America generation. I read all those books growing up. So just the way that I learned about events like the Civil War, like the American Revolution, really organically because I was reading about them in Dear America. I had all of the American Girl books. I had all these opportunities to learn about kids in history, having these adventures that made these events feel like a part of my history. I want my book to give kids a chance to see this history as their history and to see that as more expansive history. The other thing that I talk about in the book is that there were Latinos who fought in the US Civil War, which we never talk about. So there is a Cuban American, I'm Cuban American, so of course I wanted to find the Cuban American. There's a Cuban American Union officer who appears as a fictional character in the book. He's inspired by a real officer. And so I just think that that history is almost never highlighted for kids. And it's so affirming to know that your people played important roles in history, and every kid deserves to feel that connection to our history, to our national history, especially.
So this is exactly why it is perfect that you have the PhD in history and you have all that knowledge, but it is put in such a way that it's entertaining in the story, but like I said, it just comes so naturally and seamlessly to
Mhm.
consider. Like
Yeah,
all of that history that the adult reading might not know, that the kids reading might not know, but that when you're done, like you can't unknow it, which is such a wonderful
yeah,
thing to be able to truly understand that period of time and
yeah,
certainly how it relates to today's world as well.
yeah, yeah,
So in the book, you have there's a couple of things in the back that I
yeah.
love. You have your author's note, then you've got some
Mhm.
special notes, you've got the glossary, you have the further learning because that I love when one book sparks something, right? And I
Mhm.
could see this book certainly sparking the
Yeah.
next book or the next question or the next
Yes.
conversation in the classroom. And I'd love for you to talk about the importance of including those
Yeah.
elements in the book and perhaps what you talk about with kids when you talk to them about the book and school visits or when you get a chance to talk to
Mhm.
readers, what that is like as well.
Yeah, so the book has a really extensive for the back matter, for lack of a better word. There's a further reading section, both for children, as well as a, fairly long bibliography for adults. There's an author's note. There's some special notes that give additional information about many of the topics that are covered in the book. I should mention this book is it's about 40,000 words. It's just exactly 200 pages, with including illustrations. So it's not a long book. It's actually on the shorter end of middle grade novels. And so that was very intentional because history is sort of seen as heavy and hard and challenging. And so I wanted this to feel fun and adventurous and exciting. And it has these gorgeous black and white illustrations throughout the book by Polly Bednatene. But there is also this back matter that I provide. And part of that is, as you said, I knew that the people who would be teaching this book are not necessarily, nobody expects them to know a history that we are not taught at any point in our education, K through really, unless you go and get a specialized graduate degree, you don't learn this history. So I wanted to provide that information for educators who might want to teach the book. I wanted to make it really easy for, let's say, a seventh grade teacher who's doing a Civil War unit to drop this book in. Maybe this year, instead of reading Across Five Aprils, you read Cousins in the Time of Magic. And I wanted to make that really easy. And part of what the back matter is doing is trying to support that work. I also wanted to model good research practices for kids. That's why there's a bibliography that's the same bibliography I would create if I were writing an academic paper on this topic. I consulted all of the same sources, and I think that sometimes in historical fiction, we don't have a bibliography,
Right.
but especially in a moment where how we do research is evolving so rapidly, I wanted kids to see, if you write about history, you show your sources and you have those sources, and those are academic references. I'm looking at sources that were written at the time, as well as academic work that's been written since then. So the bibliography was super important for me. And then the suggestions for further reading. I I go to a wonderful library and I love the librarian there, and they have just a great general collection for children. And so I wanted to have books that kids who wanted to learn more about could go to in addition to the bibliography for adults. And so I went to the library and did the experiment to say, you know, what would I find if I were a kid who wanted to learn more about the Civil War and Cinco de Mayo? What could I get my hands on? And I included some of the books that I thought were exemplary, because there are actually many, and I probably could have had more, so that hopefully kids can follow some of those books. And I got to tell you, some of the books I read about some of the topics in this book are so much fun. In the further reading section, there's a whole section on telegrams, ciphers, and spies, because there are great middle grade books on those topics. If you are interested in codes and puzzles, there is nothing more fun than learning about 19th century spy technology. It's just an incredible, really fun history. Also about ballooning. I mean, ballooning in the 19th century is fascinating, and there are great books for middle grade readers about that. So
Mhm.
I'm going on and on, mostly because I think there's a lot there for kids, and I encourage them to check out those books. And one thing I did that was really fun is I did a event for children where the librarian pulled out all of the books that I mentioned in the further reading section and, put them on display for the kids, so kids could actually come to my reading of Cousins in the Time of Magic and then check out some of the books that I suggest for reading. And that was really, really fun. It was just fun to see them all.
When one book sparks the next book, which sparks the next question. I love that. I talk to kids
Yeah.
about like the trail of reading or the staircase of
Yeah.
that you can just take one and go to the next and the next and the next. And
Yes.
starting with a story like this, like you said, you could go in so many different
Right.
directions, but just keep going and keep learning and keep having fun
Yeah. Yes.
while you're doing it as well.
And I really want there to be so many different entry points for kids,
Mhm.
because we know fantasy draws in a lot of kids into history. We know there are the kids who are going to be interested in it. We know, I know for my readers and the educators that I work with, there are educators who will pull my book off of the shelf every Hispanic Heritage Month, and that's going to bring in some kids. But then I also want the kid who is reading Nathan Hale's Big Bad Ironclad. Like, I want that reader for my book, because that is the reader who might hear fantasy, history, Latino issues, and not pick up my book. But I want them to know, look, you
Yeah.
like boats, you like telegrams, you like cool, weird technology. That's in this book too. And so that ability to pull in different readers and give them different entry points into a topic that seems unapproachable sometimes to kids when it shouldn't be, because this is all of our history. It's everybody's history.
Yeah. That is probably the best part, isn't it? When you have so many different layers in
Yeah.
the book that readers can sink into, whether it's the fantasy layer, the time travel layer, the oh my gosh, there were balloons back then layer, to the historical level, to just reading a book because there's cousins and I have a lot
Yeah.
of cousins, right? There's so
Yes.
many different entry points, but then when you're there, you
Right.
just stay for a while and you get all of it. You get the fun
Hmm.
story, you get the antics of
Hmm.
the kids
Yes.
and what goes on, along with that really important, meaningful historical work that just makes so much sense as you are
Yeah.
engaged in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's going to hook our reluctant readers that we're always
Right.
trying to hook as well, because they'll
Yes.
they'll be in it. They'll be in
Right.
it. Now,
Yes.
you did mention, you kind of dropped it earlier where you said in this first book.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
what does that
So
mean? Give us a sneak peek.
yeah, so there's a sequel coming out. It should be out. I don't know the exact publication date yet, but it will be sometime in 2026. That sequel is called Adventure in the City of Stories because it takes place in my hometown, New York City. And it is in this adventure, the kids go back to the year 1930. This is a really interesting year. It's the year where the skyscrapers are going up, the Empire State Building is being built, the Chrysler Building is brand new, so the New York City skyline is just emerging. It's, of course, the second year, or really the end of the first year of the Great Depression. And for my cousins, it's also a time where a lot of exciting things were happening in the literary and cultural history of New York City. So in this book, the kids get to meet, of course, Pura Belpré, who we know because of the award. Pura Belpré is the first Puerto Rican librarian at the New York Public Library. She advocated for the needs of Latino and also other immigrant kids in the New York Public Library system. She wrote wonderful books, including a story called Perez and Martina, which is based on the Caribbean folktale La Cucaracha Martina. This is a folktale that my mom told me when I was a kid growing up. It's told in several islands in the Caribbean. So Belpre created a picture book, as well as other books based on this and other Caribbean folktales. So the cousins get to meet her, but they also get to meet Gabriela Mistral, the Chilean Nobel Prize winning poet, because she was also in New York City in 1930. She was teaching at Barnard, living in New York City, and she wasn't that far away from Pura Belpré. And one of the interesting things I found doing the research for this book is that Pura Belpré actually hosted Mistral at her library on 115th Street. So the cousins get to go to that event. I won't tell you what happens at that event because lots of drama ensues. So they get to meet Belpré, they get to meet Mistral. They also get to meet Arturo Schomburg, who was the founder, he was a curator who founded the Schomburg Center, currently called the Schomburg Center for Black Culture in New York City. Um, so they get to meet Schomburg. They just get to meet all of these literary icons that were active in New York City in the year 1930. And again, we tend to put these historical figures in silos. So Mistral and Belpré, we don't really think of them as connected because we think of one as sort of um, working with children, doing community work, working in the library. We think of Mistral as being in the more, she's a poet. She is, when she's in New York City, she's at Barnard University. We think of them as really separate people. They're from two totally different parts of Latin America that are not nearby at all. But when they were in New York, they were together and they were connected. And they were connected by a common love and passion, not only for children. Mistral's poetry, she writes beautiful things about children, about love for children, the almost desperate way in which mothers love their children. So Belpré and Mistral, they have all these thematic connections. And when they were in New York City, they actually met. So that's what these books give me a chance to do, is to make connections that are there, but that academic study doesn't always invite us to consider. And again, I hope make these figures seem natural to kids, to make them seem like people that when they go to college, if there is a Mistral poem in one of the English literature courses they're taking, or if they're taking a Spanish literature course, I don't want them to have that, oh, Mistral is sort of not for me, it's someone else. I want them to say, oh, wait, this is someone who I read about in school when I was a kid, who I feel connected to. I want to learn more and hopefully be pulled into the literature in that way. So that was another reason that this was important to me.
I just love that you're taking those, like you said, things that may not have been talked about together in the past, although they could have been, and
Yeah.
we could say should have been. You're connecting the dots to them. And while listeners can't see us because we're on audio, if you could have just seen how bright and the enthusiasm that radiates off you when you talk about the people and
Yeah.
the content and the topics and the way it's coming together and what your books do, like you've
Yeah.
bottled it in your books, but seeing it as you talked
Yeah.
about was really special. And I bet they could
Yeah.
hear it. I know they could
Yes.
hear it, but
And I wanted to mention one last person who is in this sequel, Adventure in the City of Stories, and that is Anne Carroll Moore, who was the first children's librarian at the New York Public Library. She established the children's program at the library. And she's somebody who I think we owe a lot of the concepts about children's autonomy in reading to Anne Carroll Moore. And because I think we're at a point where some of that, what I would call the conceptual framework around autonomy in kids reading, is being lost. Yeah. I think it's really important time to highlight her work. And I'm so glad that it worked out that she also happened to live at this time. And so I have spent the last 2 years really with her and with her moment in history, reading about her ideas about why we should give children choice over their reading, why we should be letting children be the people who build their own staircase to books and to book culture, and how important that you and me, both of us, are people who I think grew up in a world of children's reading that was informed by those ideas, and that I think are critical.
yes, I say we need that conversation more than ever
Yeah.
right now. So what an
Yeah.
important 2000, I don't usually like to rush time, but 2026 can get you
Yes.
wherever it would
We'll
like.
make sure you have a copy when we have galleys, for sure.
Good, good. And offers always open to come back and talk about
Yeah,
it too
I will.
when this year.
Yeah,
Oh, this has
absolutely.
been such a wonderful conversation about a wonderful book. I would love to ask you before we end, where can listeners find you so that they can
Yes.
keep up to date with you and keep track when this new book is
Yes.
coming?
Yes. So the best way to keep track of me is at my newsletter. If you go to my website, which is emmaotheguy.com, you'll see a pop-up. It'll prompt you for your email. That will subscribe you to my newsletter. Or you can go directly to Substack at emmaotheguy.substack.com. And that's where you can subscribe to my newsletter. I am pointing you to my newsletter because I have Facebook and Instagram and X profiles, but I have been taking an extended break from social media for several months now. I have not logged on. If you are someone who DM'd me there, please send me an email because I didn't see your message. And it's something that I've been thinking about really extensively. And one of the things that I want in my own life as an author and as a parent, frankly, for my kids, is for them to see me reading books instead of uh, online. And I realized that I want to be spending more time reading books. So I haven't been checking social media because it just pulls you in and it wastes time. For me, it's not saying that lots of people, I see all sorts of authors do all sorts of wonderful and creative things there. And I assume I'll log back in at some point and check things, but I really have been trying to be there. So I would love to stay in touch with you. The way to do that is definitely through my newsletter or through email. I always respond to emails. If somebody is, reading my newsletter and hits reply and writes back to me, I will always write back to you. It might take me a few days, but I'll always write back to you. So I try to be really available and accessible to readers. I'm just trying to move that over into my newsletter and to email rather than having it take place in basically anywhere where I could be potentially scrolling for an unlimited amount of time. I'm trying to be less scrollish and more bookish is my goal. The other place to find me is at Lonnie Lane Marketing. Lonnie Lane Marketing, that's Lonnie Lane Marketing, is where my booking for author visits and events takes place. So if you want to bring me to your school, if you want to bring me to your library, if you want to bring me to your university, Lisa Nadell is my booking agent. She's over at Lonnie Lane Marketing. Her website will help you get set up and book an event for me to come to your school and library and meet readers, which is what I love to do. Is to talk to kids and to teachers.
And then they can see the glow in person that comes when you're
Yes.
talking about
Oh,
content.
yes. I love that. Yes, I hope so. I try to really be enthusiastic and fun for kids. So
Yeah,
glow is a good word.
it is. And it comes through. It comes through. It comes through in your book. It comes through in the conversation.
Oh,
It's been wonderful chatting with you. Thank you so much for coming on and
thank you, Stephanie. It was great talking to you. I really appreciate you having me.
oh, loved it. And listeners, thank you for listening to another episode of KidLit Love, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the KidLit Love podcast. You'll find links to all of the books, resources, and ideas mentioned in the show notes and at alitlife.com. You'll also find KidLit Love on Substack. That's where you'll find posts for each episode, monthly KidLit roundups, and an invitation to join my summer book club and go deeper into the world of children's literature. And if you loved this podcast and want more, you might like to listen to my other podcast called Get Literate. It's a podcast that explores all things books and reading, notebooks and writing to build a life you love. One more thing. If you love what you listened to today, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast or take a screenshot of the episode and text it to a friend. This helps the podcast grow and builds our bookish community of Kid Lit Love. Thanks for listening.